Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Guy Crittenden, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Thank you.
I guess we should mention that you connected to this podcast through one James Robert Dull.
I did.
How do you and Rob know each other?
Rob and I are cousins-in-law. He's like a cousin to my wife, and we've known each other since he was knee-high. So that's how I know Rob, and have known him for many, many years.
Well, Rob's just turned 55, so if you knew him when he was knee-high, it's 5 decades, sounds like, plus.
You're 55?
Yep.
Wow.
Did that make you feel
I thought
old?
you were more like 45.
I wish.
You wish.
So, Guy, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Gloucester County in the 60s and 70s, and Gloucester at the time was very rural, and I grew up right on the Ware River, and my dad was a dentist, my mom was a teacher, and we had a really beautiful home right on the water with 3 acres of land. And my grandfather grew up there. He was born in 1904 and knew that river like the back of his hand, and he taught me everything I knew about hunting and fishing. From the time I could walk, I was going hunting and fishing with him, and he basically raised me in the ways of the river, and the Prince of Tides, I called him. He was a cool guy and really well known in Gloucester folklore kind of. He ran a country store in Ware and grew up down there on Ware and he was the oldest of a family of 9 children, and my grandmother was the oldest of a family of 8. So I had 15 great aunts and uncles in Gloucester County. So talking about knowing everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, you couldn't get away with anything.
You couldn't get away with anybody, with anything. I mean, if it was in the rumor mill in Gloucester County, it got back to either my parents or grandparents. So
Yeah, pretty quickly, it sounds like.
It was hard to hide.
So hunting and fishing in Gloucester, because Gloucester was not as popular back then as I imagine it is for the weekenders sort of thing. And I imagine there's a lot more retail action that's happening in Gloucester than when you were growing up. When you say fishing, were you finding little creeks to go fishing on, or were you out in the bay, or were you doing all of it?
We were doing everything. And my grandfather would, I tell the story of how my grandfather used to, he lived up in town, but we lived on the water, and he was my maternal grandfather, so he was my mom's dad. And he's the one that grew up on the Ware River, so he knew every little fishing hole, and they didn't have the fish finders back then, and to know where the holes were or where the fish settled. They just counted on experience, and he was able to line up places to fish by lining up buoys and landmarks and channel markers, and get on a spot where we would load the boat with gray trout and speckled trout from one spot. In one morning, we would, and then back then there were no limits like there are now.
Right.
So you could keep as many fish as you could catch, and we used to catch them and fill a cooler with them. I mean, these were gray trout that were 6 to 8 pounds, and their tails were as big as my hand.
And you're catching them in creeks.
And we're catching them in the river and on the Ware River, in spots. And we would catch so many fish in one morning. And I just remember as a little kid pulling in great big fish, and I've never caught gray trout, in the last 25 years like that, like we used to catch. And I don't know what that says about the bay, but the fisheries on the bay have changed a lot in the last 50 years, and but it it changes in that, the fishery for the redfish didn't used to exist. Now it does in the bay. Part of that is the warming trends and things that are going on with migrations. But the rockfish used to be everywhere. I remember we used to just go out in front of my house and troll right in front of my house and catch 5 to 6 pound rockfish. That doesn't happen up there anymore, but you can still find, pretty big speckled trout. I've seen some gray trout lately. We get on the redfish. I'm a big fly fisherman now, so I fly fish saltwater a lot for specks, for gray trout, for stripers, for redfish, and for cobia.
I associate fly fishing with like a Colorado River, a freshwater sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you're doing saltwater. Off a boat, off the shoreline?
Off a boat, usually, yep. And I have buddies that really are good. In fact, I have a couple buddies that are commercial guides. They guide professionally. And just something interesting that's happened in the last 5 years. One of my friends is one of the only guys on the lower bay fly fishing for cobia.
I've never heard of that.
I know. Well, it's not something in the normal fishery that you would see, but my friend is such an intense fly fisherman, ties his own flies, has an entire room, the size of my living room that's just devoted to fly tying. So he has learned how to tie flies that cobia will bite, cobia will eat. And we go out, and he's got a 35-foot Boston Whaler Outrage, and he retrofitted a little fly fishing pulpit at the front, a little cage with a padded bar around it, and we go pounding around that bay looking for cobia on the surface and throw flies to them, and they eat.
And you've caught a cobia?
I've caught more than a couple dozen cobia on fly in the last 2 years.
I mean, regular rod and reel, it's hard to catch cobia.
Regular rod and reel, it's a challenge, but fly is 10 times the challenge. And I think that's why he likes it so much.
Yeah.
And I've started to really enjoy it too, because it is such a skill, Whereas, I don't know, the fly fishing on saltwater is a real skill, and it's matching skill with technical. So you've got to get the right fly in the right spot with enough sinking line to drop it down 4 feet, get in front of that cobia, and get them to eat. And it's really exciting, exhilarating when they do.
You have to know your stuff, and you have to be super accurate in terms of placement and timing.
Yep. They call it the 5 and 5 rule. The 5 yards in front, 5 yards past, and you drag it in front of them. If they're going left to right, throw it 5 yards past them, 5 yards in front, and you drag it right in front of them, and they'll eat it.
And cobia is good eating, right?
Cobia is delicious. It's one of my favorite fish on the bay to eat.
And you eat every cobia you catch? Just about?
I eat it and share it. It's usually you're only keeping a 36 to 45 inch fish, so you can't keep them smaller than 36. So, on the bay, if you catch a 36 inch cobia, you're fighting that thing on a fly rod for a while, and you're only allowed one per person, and 2 per boat, I think is the limit on. But a big, 40 inch cobia feeds a lot of people.
Yeah.
it's a lot of meat. So we're filleting them up, cutting them into fillet steaks, and taking them home and giving them away to people.
How many days a year do you fish now?
Oh gosh,
roughly.
Well, up in Virginia, probably 30 days total. Yeah,
it's pretty good.
Yeah, for the cobia, maybe only like 8 or 10. But my buddy's guiding people every other day as long as the weather's good.
And he's going out into the bay?
He's going out in the bay from June 1st to the end of August, going for cobia.
And he loves it.
And then when the cobia turn off, he's gone. He's inshore, and he's gotten and he strictly fly fishing. So he's known as kind of one of the 5 or 10 saltwater fly fishing guides. And his name's Wayne McMasters, by the way. He's good. He's a good friend. He and I played football together. We played on the same defense together for 3 years. So
in college or in high school?
In college. Okay. Ware River.
All right. Nice.
He's from Delaware. Lived in Newport News and played football with me. He was a good buddy.
He's got an entire living room dedicated to tying flies.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
So besides
hundreds of them sitting around.
Yeah, I can't even picture it.
And I don't know how he tests them all, but he does. He ends up, getting them in the water, and it's amazing. I did some film work for him, so we're creating a couple films about that fishery, about the cobia.
Like a documentary kind of thing?
Documentary. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. I have some questions about video, actually. Maybe you could hook me up with some understanding of video. But your video is action oriented in sports.
Yeah.
So is it sports or sportsmen oriented, like hunting and fishing, or is it?
I call it sporting classics.
Okay. What's included in sporting?
Sporting is all types of hunting and fishing.
Okay. So hunting deer, I imagine you've been deer hunting a million times.
Well, I'm not a big deer hunter.
Okay.
I'm more of a feathers guy. If it flies, I'm hunting it.
Like pheasant, duck.
Yeah, mostly waterfowl. Here in Virginia, it's duck, goose, turkey, dove, occasional quails, but it's the quail hunting is more preserve hunting. So, but for wild game, it's duck and goose are my favorite, and then wild turkey hunting.
What's the best eating out of all that?
Probably a nice little green-winged teal or something.
Okay.
Something small and tasty. Not much of a saltwater, but a freshwater duck.
Okay.
Turkey, you can smoke a turkey too.
Ooh,
really
smoked
good.
Turkey's fantastic.
Yeah.
Smoked chicken's good.
Yeah.
Smoking anything.
Yeah.
Just about anything. All right, so when you were growing up, when you weren't with your grandfather, what were you, and you weren't hunting or fishing, what were you doing?
I was playing sports.
So in the fall, how many different sports were available to you in the fall?
Well, I played football from the time I was, in probably 5th grade when they let the recreational league started in 5th grade. And it was kind of funny. You put on these uniforms and they'd be really, pads that were too big for you, helmets that didn't have any padding in them.
Weren't really protecting
They
anything.
weren't protecting anything, but you were expected to go out there and hit. And, even in 5th and 6th grade, it was
a rite of passage.
It was.
Yeah. But soccer wasn't available back in the day, right? I'm guessing.
I don't even remember whether soccer. I think soccer was. I mean,
wasn't where I
when
grew
you
up.
say in the day, though,
well, you grew up in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, soccer was available, but it wasn't a predominant sport. It was kind of a side sport if you did it. So the big three: football, basketball, baseball.
You grew up playing all three?
Played all three. Yeah.
What was your favorite?
Basketball.
Why?
It was just a great game. I mean, I think one thing I loved about it was, and I always have loved about basketball is its continuous action. It's a high action sport. It's high scoring. It's, pick yourself up if you made a mistake on defense or you missed a shot. You had 10 seconds to get retribution.
Yeah.
So you could make up for it right away, and I love that about that sport. Whereas in football, you make a big mistake as a defensive back, and you get burned.
You may be on the bench the rest of the game.
You're 7 points down, and hard to come back. Whereas basketball was just constant action, and I loved it.
Yeah, and basketball also, I think, requires more athletically out of the player. You've got to jump high. You've got to be quick, fast.
And it involves all four. Where you can go 10 plays as a wide receiver and not see the ball ever, for a whole half. And they do it in the pros.
Yeah, it happens in the pros all the time.
But in basketball, you're 1 of 5, and you're always out there, and you're always in the game, and you're integral to the whole thing, whether on the defensive side or offense. That's what I love about basketball. And I actually coached basketball for 20 years but I made my hay playing football, because that's kind of where my skill set lied for college. And
so what made you good at football? Because you were good enough to play at William and Mary.
Yeah. They just, when college recruiters come to you and say, we're really interested in looking at you for, a scholarship or whatever, you really aren't prepared for that. You're like, okay, these days coaches come to you when you're 9th grade and they see
even earlier
athletic talent at the club level or whatever, and they say, we're really interested and we want to follow up you. And they keep a line of communication for years. Didn't happen back in the day, like we talk about. Back then, we were recruited. My junior year was my breakout year. And so college coaches had no idea who I was until my junior year, when I had like 9 interceptions and as a defensive back, and had almost 1,000 yards receiving as a receiver. And, all of a sudden I was on their radar. And so, came, the summer before my senior year, and I'd get, 20 letters in the mail in one week and say, hey, we saw your stats. We saw your, what you're doing there. We're really interested in talking to you. And got letters from big name colleges, and then they start to whittle away, like, okay, let's see what our recruiting list looks like, and then start to form our team. But, I was recruited by a lot of Virginia schools, UVA, Virginia Tech, JMU, Richmond, William and Mary, ODU. And I just, the reason I settled on William and Mary was because of the coaching staff. Jimmy Laycock's,
was he the coach back
Jimmy
then?
Laycock's first year was my first year. He took over for Jim Root in 1980, and 1980 was my first fall. So they followed up on the recruiting, and I just loved the staff there. It made it, it was a great place to get a really good education. And I decided on William and Mary for those reasons.
Well, you're tall. And so the fact that you played wide receiver is not shocking, but playing DB at your height is a little surprising.
I played free safety in high school.
Okay.
And wide out and some tight end, but the range, I was pretty fast, and so the range on a 6'2" guy running a pattern, it was attractive to college coaches.
You could cover more distance with your feet, and your catch radius was bigger.
Yeah, and I wasn't afraid to hit.
That was the most fun part of playing.
Well, I was recruited as a DB because of my aggressive nature.
What I tell everybody about free safety, because I also played free safety, not in college but in high school, is there's one dude with a ball on offense and then 10 dudes in theory trying to block. The one they tended not to block was the free safety, because he was furthest away from the
That's why
ball.
They called him free.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And it was as you say, one of those positions that doesn't get blocked. It's hard to block a free safety because they're usually at full speed in 5 steps.
Yep.
And so the problem is you just have to read whether it's run, pass, and then
you definitely don't want to read that
you
wrong.
fly to the ball, and that's all I did. And I led the team in tackles because I was free, and I was fast. I could cover edge to edge, and people didn't have a lot of running game like they do these days. Like the run pass option wasn't part of it.
Yeah,
it was run or it was pass. It wasn't RPOs back then.
There was basic play action though, like a fake handoff?
Yeah, there was play action.
Yeah, but it was those 3. It was run, pass, or fake the run and pass it.
And so my roommate, and one of my best friends, David Murphy, was the first Metro Player of the Year in 1980 or 79 was his senior year, and he made a living throwing the ball at collegiate school, and had all the records at collegiate until Russell Wilson came along.
Which meant they stood for a while.
They stood for 25 years, yeah. And he broke season records, and he was an amazing player back then. But he threw the ball 45 times a game at the high school level.
That's unheard of.
That's unheard of, unless you have a great passer,
right,
and some good receivers.
Right.
Let's face it, you need to throw to people that can catch. So, he lived by the pass, and even had some wheels, and he could get downfield if the play broke. But that didn't happen much. The teams that I played against threw the ball 10 times a game, and ran the ball 40 times a game. So I had a hard time getting interceptions.
Well, I was going to say 9 interceptions, and they probably threw the ball 100 times all season. That's saying something. And then 1,000 yards.
Well, no, they didn't throw it very well. They throw it down the middle and lob it up there. And I was 6'2", so I'd go get it.
They were hoping you weren't going to notice that they threw it near you.
Right. They started not throwing down the middle. Yeah.
How many times did you get burned at William & Mary playing free safety?
Oh, a couple times.
It's horrible feeling.
It's a horrible feel. But mostly in like a man-to-man where there's a lot of motion going on, and you're supposed to have one man and then he crosses over. It's hard. It's a hard job playing DB in the pros and college because they're always sending motion in, and you
get hung up in the wash.
Crossing it, you hear it all the time, like busted coverage. That was common. In fact, busted coverages are pretty common because you lose track of your assignment and you get mixed up. But
so Laycock your first year was his first year as a coach. What I've always heard about college, especially Division I college coaches, is they're more CEOs now, and that may be more of an 80s, 90s, 2000s. Like the real coach was the positional coach, the O-line coach, or maybe the offensive coordinator kind of thing. Right. Was Laycock a hands-on kind of guy, or was he kind of standing back orchestrating?
He was a brilliant offensive mind, so he would make some comments to the defense now and again, but he really did turn the reins over to the defensive coordinator. And so we would back when in the early 80s, William & Mary was an enigma because we played the Virginia Techs every year. We played, Carolina and, Rutgers one year, Marshall University. But then we would also play Ivy League schools and VMI and Richmond. And so, we had a wide range we weren't in a conference back then, which I think really helps players with their identity and who they are within the league. But we didn't have a conference back then. It was called the ECAC South, and it was basically 20 independent schools.
Yeah.
But now it's the CAA, ACC, CAA, different level. With our level of play now, the FCS is now, the division that we play in. Didn't exist until my senior year.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they called it Division I AA back then. Sure. They just created it my senior, like 1983.
Yeah, JMU, U of R, and William & Mary were the I AA schools.
Yep.
Yeah. Laycock, what was his personality like? He was there forever, right? I mean,
he was there for 39 years.
That's forever.
Yeah. And so I date how old I am by how many years he's been. So, yeah, he just retired in like 2017 or 18, I think. Mike London took over.
Yeah.
But Jimmy was great. He, like I say, he didn't have, he propped his players up, and he didn't have a lot to say about the defensive side of the ball, but he was brilliant on the offensive side, and he was a good. He and my buddy David Murphy. David Murphy played quarterback at William & Mary. Also, his senior year, he did amazing things and went and broke William & Mary records in the 8 games that he played on his senior year. So he and Murph were good buddies, and but Laycock was a solid coach, and just he had a very creative mind offensively.
Did he get along with the players, generally speaking?
He did.
Yeah. So that rare creative.
And they became friends of his later, and
it's unusual.
Yeah.
To be that creative and to connect that well with 18 to 22-year-old kids.
It is. And he was one of the youngest coaches in the NCAA at the time. He was 32 when he took the job.
He had to be to coach as long as he did. There.
32. Can you imagine being 32 and head football coach at college?
Division I, no way.
And you're in charge of, like you said, 90 18 to 22-year-olds and trying to herd cats. It's just, yeah.
And some are less mature than others.
Yeah.
What was about William & Mary that attracted you to go there?
Like I said, the quality of education, I'd heard about William & Mary forever. My father actually went to U of R. He was in med school at MCV and went to undergrad at U of R, and I followed a guy named Barty Smith. You remember Barty Smith from U of R?
Oh, yeah.
He was an All-American at U of R, and my dad would always take us to the Ware River University of Richmond game, and we would kind of be on the University of Richmond side. And Barty Smith was this amazing running back then. And I was just thinking, when I was 10, 12 years old, like, man, I want to play college football. And just seeing, you see your heroes when you're a young kid, and you just go, I want to be that guy. And I just remember, when I told my father I was going to William & Mary, he kind of went, "Oh, okay, all right." Didn't turn down U of R and going to William & Mary, the rival. So
yeah, I was gonna say it's a rivalry.
But you know what? He and my mom both changed their outfits to green and gold and never turned back
because you were their son.
To the blue and red. So yeah, and they went to games forever after that, to William & Mary games.
Are they hanging out with Cam Newton these days?
My mom is still alive. She's 93 years old, and I took her to a game a couple weeks ago, one of the last games against Villanova, and she said, I haven't been to a game in like 10 years, and she really hadn't been to a game in maybe 5, but she remembered so many things about my friends, the boys, she called them. The boys would come over and eat fried chicken at our tailgate and party after, and my mom and dad would always take my friends out to dinner after a football game. So, we were pretty tight with a lot of my buddies and their families. Great
memories for your mom and you.
Great memories for my parents.
Yeah. That's really. I mentioned Cam Newton because his brother, I think, plays with William & Mary.
That's
now.
Right. Yeah.
Is his brother?
He's a good player.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to be offensive with this question, but why would he go to William & Mary if he could have gone to?
Well, I think London's a good recruiter, and I think there are a lot of guys that find themselves in a position to go, and you know this. You can either go to a smaller school where you have a chance to play immediately and contribute, or you can go to a bigger school and maybe not see the field for 4 years. So there's a big, that was a choice that I made too. Like I got recruited by some bigger schools, but would I have played? I don't know, but it didn't come to that because I started for 3 years at William & Mary.
Because you wanted to be on the field.
I wanted to be on the field. I mean, you don't decide to put that much time and effort into a sport like that and not, and lo and behold, you're not seeing playing time. It's kind of a crushing blow.
Yeah, the physical toll on your body from conditioning and from physical contact, brutal physical contact in practice, and then you don't get to play in the game.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Yeah.
That's really rough.
The reward was Saturdays.
Yeah. All that work was for playing on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. And you know this. It's like going, every team are your, soldiers beside you, and you
camaraderie is
go to war
powerful.
for them.
Yeah. Hey, so do you recall the best hit you ever had? And we have to remind people that are listening that the rules of football were very different back then.
Yeah.
What was your best hit at William & Mary? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. A bunch of them, but vividly, we also played East Carolina. And so I was a guy that moved from free safety to outside backer my sophomore year. So by middle way through that first season that I started, I was outside backer, and I would blitz a lot. And so we ran, twists and what we call C stunts, coming under the tackle, and I remember maybe half a dozen or a dozen plays coming on that C stunt and meeting the running back in the hole as he was receiving the ball. So tackles for losses were big. Sacks and tackles for losses were big in my stat category. And once I moved to backer, it was a natural position for me because I was really super aggressive. And helmet to helmet was the reward because hearing that sound bite was really kind of cool. You'd hear that helmet on helmet, poof.
The timing of hitting a running back as he's trying to concentrate on receiving the ball, like he's defenseless at that point.
Yeah. And what does he do? The first thing he does, he ducks his head to protect himself.
Right.
To protect the ball. And so what do? Put my head right on that helmet as hard as I can.
And today that would be a problem.
Backwards. Yeah.
That would be a problem today.
It would be targeting. For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't last half a game in any game that I played if there was targeting back then.
But you would have adjusted your game.
You would adjust your game, but then it
wouldn't be as fun.
Soft.
It wouldn't be as fun.
I didn't want to be known as soft, so
Do you regret football changing the rules, like the way they play
today?
No,
I don't, because I think it's been the right thing to do. I mean, there are ways to play football without helmet to helmet,
without wrecking the other guy.
I do think that there should be a little more, leniency given to defensive players that go in trying to hit low, in the midsection, and offensive players lowering their heads.
Yeah, it happens all the time
to protect themselves.
And there's nothing the defensive player can do about it.
Nothing. It's a bang bang play. It's happening 1,000 miles an hour, and in slow motion on the replay, you can see it's helmet to helmet. But at the time, there's no way that you can stop yourself from.
It's physically impossible.
Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to make that sort of adjustment within a millisecond, you can't be done.
Right. And so, as defensive players, you're trained to hit people. And
that's your job.
And knock them backwards. And so it's hard for me to see that change in the rules where you're not allowed to, hit like that anymore. But I do agree with the philosophy of, not defensive players and, players that are vulnerable. I do agree that you shouldn't be, hitting the crown area with those players.
Yeah, because brain injuries are a thing from football.
They are.
And I imagine you had a concussion or two playing. And
I'm pretty sure I was concussed the whole 4 years.
Yeah, because if you got a concussion, like if you had changed your demeanor, whether you were wobbly on your feet or you just maybe weren't making normal sense,
right.
I imagine they told you to just rub some dirt on it and get back in there, kind of thing.
Right. As long as you were on the right side of the sideline, same colored jersey, and you didn't go to their huddle, you were fine. Get back in there. But it also explains a lot about my GPA. why my GPA wasn't as high
That's what I tell people. Yeah.
But I got out of there. I got a degree, and it was a good choice for me.
What I tell my kids is you can either have a great GPA, and that may lead to wonderful things, or they're going to give you a piece of paper if you have better than a 2.0. I'm not telling them to strive for a 2.0,
Right.
But if you get the 2.0 or higher, you're going to get a piece of paper.
And unless you're going to grad school, they don't ask you about your GPA in your job interview.
For most jobs.
For most jobs.
Yeah.
But if you go into grad school, yeah, it's kind of important. But
You're going to definitely improve your chances of getting into the grad school you want to get into, for sure. All right, so let's change pace a little bit. When did you know you could paint? When did you know you were an artist?
probably 6 years old.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Just because, by the time you're 6, you're what I call rendering things that you see and that you can copy out of a book. Or
You wanted to render because you felt like you could do it.
I don't know if there was any driving force other than I started to do it and I was pretty good and it was better than the other kids in the class at drawing.
And adults
with a
noticed.
pencil,
And adults noticed that you had skill.
And, maybe not too long after I entered school was where, other kids were asking me to draw things for them. Can you draw this, this car? Can you draw this, this athlete throwing a football? Or can you, and, by the time I was, I don't know, probably 5th grade, where I first started taking some art classes, that's when I sort of knew I had something that other kids didn't.
And did other kids think you were cool for having that ability? Or
yeah, they did.
Because it sounds like a lot of them wanted you to draw for them.
Yeah. No, they definitely kind of admired it and knew I was always in the running for the poster competition or the art competition or whatever there was. Artistically, they knew I was, good at it. And I came, in Gloucester middle schools, I mean, your classes aren't that big. So I started taking art classes in 5th grade and just kind of, dabbled with it in 5th, 6th. And then 7th and 8th, I picked it up because I started a painting class. Mm. And, I would be in the painting class with, mostly, 8 or 9 girls.
It's not a bad place to be.
One other guy. And I was like, So, this is my art class.
And you were the strapping young lad that also played football.
I did play a lot of sports. And so and people started thinking that was interesting that I, played sports and also attended Mrs. Rhodes' art class and created these paintings. And some of the first paintings I did were of nature scenes. And that's how, I grew up hunting and fishing and, observing nature out my back door every day. And so naturally when I started drawing, and my mom talks about how she was the organist at our church. My dad was in the choir, so I'd sat with my grandparents in the congregation when I was 8, 9 years old, and I would draw on the back of church bulletins, and people would save them. And take them home and frame them.
Oh, wow.
So I would, during one sermon, which I didn't really listen to, I would draw on a heron.
How old are you? How old are you roughly?
Now?
No. How old were you for this story?
7, 8 years old.
Okay.
When I started drawing them.
People were framing your drawings when you were 7. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And my grandmother, had a stack of them because I would just, I didn't think anything of it back then. I had no idea where I was going with it, but she was smart enough to save them all. And fortunately, the back of our church bulletins didn't have any announcements on them, so they were just blank white paper.
It was a nice canvas.
Just nice little canvas. Get a few drawings done every church sermon.
And were you drawing nature, or were you drawing what you were seeing during the?
No, I was drawing nature scenes, and from memory. So I didn't have anything to look at, so I'd draw, a pair of ducks coming in, or a heron taking off, or an osprey sitting on an old tree or, fish jumping. So it was whatever I remembered in my head. I started sketching. And the first painting I ever did was an oil painting of a goose taking off. So, and then it snowballed from 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade on. And I only took a few art classes in high school because I really, you're getting that liberal arts education with all the subjects. And, I'm in chemistry class and I'm in, statistics and geometry and doing algebra and so you're taking all those subjects, but oddly I didn't get to participate in art very much, so I had to cover my bases. I only took like one or two semesters during my high school years, but I did take some private lessons from an artist in Gloucester. That it was an interesting story my mom always tells about how she and my grandfather were talented, and they took art classes from this guy named James Ware, and who was a talented watercolor artist. And he gave lessons at a local little store, and 8 to 10 adults would go in there and paint, and how the art classes go. And she one day asked Mr. Ware if she could bring me. And he said, well, how old is he? And she goes, he's 12. And he goes, well, I don't really give lessons to children. And she goes, but look, he drew this and this and this. And she showed him 3 things a day. And he said, maybe get him to come in next time. We'll see how it goes. So at 12, I was taking classes with my mother and my grandfather from a guy named James Ware for a few years.
And it sounds like he taught you.
And he was a nature guy, and he had a lot of interesting teaching techniques.
So when he's teaching you, what are you learning? I have no idea. I have zero ability to
technique mostly. Technique, not just the talent, the innate talent to render is something that a lot of artists are born with. So at age 8, I could take a photograph of a duck and I could draw it in pencil and make it look like a duck. None of my friends could do that. Their ducks ended up looking like seagulls and
or like Daffy
turkeys
Duck
or something. Yeah. But so they thought it was cool that I could do that. And so the ability to render comes to you naturally, but the ability to paint and learn the techniques of it are taught. So that's where I jumped in my learning about painting from instructors that helped me learn the technique of how to paint. And so a lot of it was trial and error. Some of it was taught, so that here's how you do a watercolor painting. Here's how you start. Here's your sketch. Here's your what you layer on the colors. But I quickly realized I was not a watercolor painter, and I haven't done very few watercolors in my life. I was an oil painter, and the way that my brain worked, thought in oils, and it has ever since. And so 98% of my work is in oil, and it just allows a freedom, but a method to the freedom, and a building of the colors in the paint from back to front. And so that's how I've evolved over the years, is doing different techniques with oils that I've won a lot of competitions and have a lot of awards and accolades, and going back to my younger years, but they were mostly for my oil paintings.
In 2023, how many paintings do you think you'll do?
I've been averaging since I turned 50. I've had a different career up until I was 50, and then I was a commercial photographer, a video producer. I did work for agencies and all over the country, and magazines. And so I did a lot of commercial photography in the last 25, 30 years. But, and that didn't allow me to do as much painting as I liked to do. So I concentrated on, commissions and a few competitions and things. But when I turned 50 years old, I just had this jump in productivity. And I'd heard that about artists for years, that they, around the age of 50, they just become better artists and they become more prolific. And I think it's mortality. I think we think about what kind of legacy you want to leave, because artists, there's an end game, and there's no more original Guy Crittendens produced when I'm gone. So, there's a legacy I want to leave to my children, grandchildren, and their children. So, I probably, in the last 10 years, I'm 60 now, so in the last 10 years, I've produced maybe 50 to 60 paintings a year.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And some of them are small, and some of them are really large. And sometimes they're inspired by, my own experiences, either trips or like some of my fishing and hunting trips, my photography excursions, things I can take, note of and go back to the studio and produce a painting of. I'll do a lot of that because most of my paintings are from my experience.
Painting from memory or painting from photography,
or
both?
A lot of both, photography and memory, and just years and years of knowing what a black duck looks like coming into decoys, and what a heron looks like jumping from a log, to take off. Those things, I work photographs for reference, but I compose the scene of, okay, I just saw that on my hunting trip, or I just saw the scene on my fishing trip, and I want to paint it. So, and a lot of people say that they can tell right away that I'm not just an artist who chose to paint. I'm a sportsman who chose to paint from his experiences, not an artist who just decided to paint a fisherman because he saw it, but more because that's what I do. And so I'm painting what I love. I love, what I paint, and I paint mostly from my experiences.
And you're drawn to the sporting life, and you have the ability to paint. You enjoy painting too, obviously.
Yeah.
Because I get the point of turning 50, and you're sort of willing yourself to be more prolific, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. But let's just say the last year you did 50. How many of those are commissioned versus how many of those are just what you want to do yourself?
I would say 20% are commissions.
Okay.
The other 80 are either competitions, or they're ideas that I just want to put on canvas. And because I do end up selling a lot of reproductions. So for instance, we were talking earlier about the cobia.
Yeah.
Up until last year, I hadn't done any cobia paintings. They're really hard to get pictures of because, usually when you're fishing for cobia, it's in kind of murky salt water, green, gray water. And so it's hard to get a clean video. And I do underwater video of my fishing trips. So whenever there's a fish coming to the boat, I'm sticking a GoPro in the water, and I'm getting that reference so that I can go home and freeze frame one of those frames and paint from it. So I did that with the cobia, and everybody went nuts over it. They thought, oh man, the cobia underwater, but in more clear water, because that's the artistic liberty I can take, is making the water more clear than the summertime water in the Chesapeake Bay. And so I made this cobia real clear and what looks like almost Florida water, and everybody went crazy over it. So now I'm starting to paint some more cobia. I've been asked to do a commission of cobia. I've got a big commission of some rockfish going. I've got a couple of hunting scenes, a marsh, a couple of river houses. So, a lot of, I'd say 50% of my time right now is spent doing commissions. But, I'll find a break in there where I'll pass up a few commissions to do my own stuff, because you got to keep it interesting for you. You can't just always paint for somebody else.
It starts to feel like work if you're always doing it for somebody else.
Exactly, and that's I've always wanted to keep it about my experience and kind of my hunting and fishing experiences and excursions. So that, for instance, I just in the last 6 or 8 years I've been going to Costa Rica to do some offshore fishing, and got an unbelievable, beautiful reference of tuna and mahi and sailfish and marlin, all in the beautiful Pacific water.
Just gorgeous water.
10 miles off the coast. In rolling, beautiful sea. It feels like, the Chesapeake Bay in the middle of June. So, getting that reference, I've started to do a lot of blue water. I call it blue water fishing scenes. A lot of underwater marlin and sailfish and mahi, and so I've got that whole genre going. And it was all predicated on my experience and my video underwater videos. I even jumped in the water with a 185-pound sailfish and held it by its bill and its sail while
they're hard to land.
Yeah,
super hard to land.
Well, he had to be gassed, and I was gassed too. I got in with. I wasn't tethered to anything. I was just floating with him, swimming along with him, and the captain and the first mate were in the water with GoPros on their heads, photographing, videoing me holding this thing, and it's on my website. It's kind of cool.
Sailfish are incredibly cool fish to catch,
and beautiful too. They're just so kind of majestic.
Yeah. So I apologize for the naive question. When somebody commissions a piece through you, are you agreeing on how much they're going to pay you before you start the work, or does it happen when the piece is finished? It has to be agreed upon beforehand.
Yeah, it's agreed upon beforehand, and it's a combination of the size, work, and what's involved. And sometimes it's all right. I have to go to if it's a commission of a specific place.
Right.
I have to go do research, go take pictures, go at a certain time of year. In their marsh, you make sure their blind is brushed, and maybe put a boat out in front like they're picking up decoys or something. Anything like that takes extra work, extra time, extra money. But mostly my commissions draw a certain price for a certain size.
Yeah. Okay. Your senior year at William & Mary, was there any possibility of you going in the NFL?
USFL.
Really?
I thought about it, and had my coaches and some interesting inquiries about it, but I ultimately decided that I had enough, and I was ready to go on with start my career somewhere. So I moved from Williamsburg to Atlanta, Georgia, and started my art career. So that's when I started in the commercial art. I went to the Art Institute of Atlanta, which was a commercial art school, and it trained for people to become art directors and designers and illustrators and whatnot. So I did almost 2 years there, and then got a job in advertising right away as an art director, and yeah, it was great.
How much of your career have you? Sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I spent 10 years with 3 different ad agencies before starting my own firm in '94.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So you worked for somebody else for 10 years, and then you've worked for yourself, which most people who've always worked for somebody else are like, oh, it must be amazing to do your own thing. But I imagine there are a lot of really hard parts of working for yourself too.
There are. Yeah. The number one tough thing to do is get business.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so But it was an interesting evolution because I was an art director for ad agencies, and this was the late '90s, not the late '90s, late '80s, early '90s, and at the time, personal computers were really taking over the design world, and so people, that used to, paste up on a big drawing board with a T-square and get what they call galleys of type and wax them onto these big sheets of board that were marked off with exact and precise measurements. That all went away when the personal computer started doing design work, and all the art directors started designing on their computers. That happened right as I was getting to Richmond in the early '90s, and I saw an opportunity to use the personal computer to manipulate photography and take professional photography and add this beautiful blue glow to it that you couldn't do through the camera. You could do it digitally. So that's how I started my business, was doing work for ad agencies that needed an artist eye, but computer technical skills, and put this Mercedes that was shot on a studio in New York, and scan that and put it on a beach in Laguna, California, somewhere.
And the technology was good enough that looked real?
That's where I made my haze, because I could take it and make it look more real than these what they call operators at these big, what they called, I forgot what the name of these production houses they call them.
Yeah.
So, ad agency would go to these production houses, and they would have technical guys that would manipulate pixels and try. But I was an artist that did that.
You were doing,
so just like
you could effectively do the whole thing.
So just like, to sort of make a comparison, was just like I'd started when I was 6 years old, drawing better than anybody else. I was now 35 years old, and I could manipulate photography better than anyone else in the city of Richmond at the time. And so I was hired by the Martin Agency and all these big ad firms that gave me unbelievable projects to do, and that's how I started my business. And I went from working for somebody else doing that to making a $50,000 investment in computer equipment and photography equipment, and started my own firm.
No regrets?
None. It was an exciting time.
And it stayed exciting for a while, I imagine.
Long time, yeah. Good 20 years until the barrier to entry to get into commercial photography and so was really high back in the 90s. But you could buy a camera in 2010 for $500 with a good lens, and you could call yourself a commercial photographer. So there were all these kids coming out of college claiming they were professional photographers because they had a nice professional camera. It was only cost them $1,000 of investment, and now they're professional. So when that happened, it undercut a lot of professional photographers that made their living, shooting ads for big companies, and what they used to, charge $5,000 for one shoot. Now college kids were coming in and shooting it for $500.
Yeah.
And
that has to change things.
Crushed the business.
So when you think about a good photo, what are the elements of a good photo? Whether it was 1995 or today? Yeah.
Composition, color, depended on your your end goal. But I always thought compositionally and digitally, so that it didn't take one good photo. Sometimes it took 10 good photos to make one good image. And that's why I was able to make a 25-year career out of manipulating images, because I could take those 10 photos and I could put them together and make them look like one thing, one image. And that image would be, you look in almost every magazine or on television, everything's manipulated digitally now. Everything. So
that woman's actually not that attractive.
She's not. You should see her in the daytime. Yeah.
So when you say composition, tell me more about composition.
Well, in the ad world, it used to be that composition was big because there had to be copy space. You had to allow for where the copy was going to go. So you had to compose a photo, either digitally or in the camera, that allowed for their ad to be exactly like they wanted, with the headline up the top and the copy down below or on the side. So that was a different kind of necessity back then. But these days you can move everything around digitally, so it's not as important as it used to be, composition. But the composition of a beautiful photograph is still important. It's still very noticeable to the trained eye, and a lot to the untrained eye too. Like when you see a beautiful photograph and it's composed beautifully, edge to edge, and it just strikes you a certain way, then that hasn't changed. It's still, composition is still probably the most important thing in a good photograph.
All right, so back to oil paintings. When you're
Same thing, by the way.
Composition
is huge with painting, and any artist will tell you that. Now, beyond that, it's it's technique and tone and color balance and training, the eye following the painting around and completing the painting visually. So there's a lot of that to painting that may not come into photography as much, but composition's still king.
I imagine composition in painting is more intricate, or is that not accurate?
I don't think intricate is the word I would use. It's importance. Yeah, I think. The composition is still very important, but you can have a very abstract painting that is composed beautifully with color and tone. You've seen abstract paintings, and they either do something for you or they don't. They either move you, or it's like, a kid could do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think that. But
I'm one of them.
But a beautiful composition in an abstract painting is just as important as it is in a really detailed, duck painting or a fish painting or one of my landscape paintings. So, I admire that about abstract artists, because they're in their composition and color and tone and value and all that is even more important than it is to me as a realist. I'm a realistic painter, and so to me, I'm trying to accurately portray what I see and what I've taken photographs of, or the realism of that scene. For instance, I've done a lot of top order fishing scenes in Bahamas and South Carolina and Florida and stuff. That scene needs to be accurate. You can't have a South Carolina marsh. You can't be brown in the middle of summer. It needs to be green, and it's an experience thing.
It's a detail that matters because it betrays the experience.
Of your experience.
Yeah.
And the people that are buying my art, for instance, are the sportsmen who know what that boat looks like and what a fly fisherman, the right fly casting motion looks like, and what that, the guy with the pole who's poling you around the marsh looks like, and what those redfish look like tailing in the marsh. And they're not going to buy something that is off, like, oh, fish don't do that. That position of that fly fisherman is not natural.
They detect it right away.
They know it right away, and that's kind of where I've made my mark, and a lot of us in the sportsman sort of sporting life field of art have done it from experience, because you can't be off with that stuff and expect
you'll go nowhere
and expect or avid fishermen to buy that painting, because they'll know that's.
So when you get a commission, I imagine the beginning stages of, hey, what exactly do you want? That conversation can be good for you or not good for you, I imagine. The act of painting, compare that, the joy you get from the actual journey of constructing the painting to actually seeing the finished product, and how much pleasure the finished product gives you. Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for a lot of artists, we have an idea of how this painting should look in the end before we start.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always turn out like that. It may take a sidebar over here, and it may veer out of the lane for a while and come back in. But I think we all have a vision of what that end product is going to be. And so after I have that vision and that sketch in my head of how it's going to turn out, I work toward it. I'd start with if you could see some of my I'm starting to put my paintings in time-lapse videos so that people can see my technique and how it progresses from a blank white canvas to this really detailed painting of wood ducks sitting on a log with a sunset behind. So that's one of my posterity things that I've talked about, is I want my kids and grandkids and their kids to have these videos of how Grandpa painted and what he did, and to achieve his best work.
That's a great gift to leave them.
Yeah, I think so. I heard something the other day about some of our biggest fear about death is being forgotten. And it's a way that I have of not being forgotten, leaving a legacy for my children and grandchildren and friends and family to enjoy my works for years. And I talked to my wife about this. It's part of my legacy that I can leave, and people leave their legacies in different ways, but mine is a visual arts legacy. So I hope they can appreciate it many generations from now, like we appreciate some of the painters and masters, and seeing, not comparing myself to masters, but you see paintings by your relatives that are gone, and you go, oh, I have a little glimpse inside their head.
Yeah.
And that's who he was. That's
99.99% of your legacy will be all the things we've talked about. 0.01% will be this audio recording.
That's okay. It's in there. It's in the books now. It sounds like
It's in the mix for sure. All right, I got a couple more questions.
okay.
Imagine you're a talk show host. It can be daytime, just a TV talk show. You get to host it one time. It's your show. You get to invite the guest. Your guest will be one male, one female, one musical act. And if you're into stand-up comedy, you can come up with a stand-up comedian. This question is meant to be a little more revealing about who you are and your personality and your interests beyond what we just talked about. Perhaps they can be alive or dead. They can be famous, not famous. They can be friends, family. These folks can be whoever you'd like to have on your talk show.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. I think he's not a celebrity in the sense that you guys think of celebrities, but he's a celebrity to me. And the guy's name is Robert Bateman, and I've often thought of just he's still alive. He's an artist. He's one of the preeminent wildlife artists, not just of our time, but probably in history. And I thought it was interesting when I read his bio. I went to his exhibit. He was the only wildlife artist to ever exhibit at the Smithsonian Institute. He's from Canada, and he's widely regarded as kind of one of the grandfathers of wildlife art. And if you saw his work, you'd know why. He's got 6 or 8 books out on full color books, and I have them all. But that's one guy I've thought I want to meet him before he passes away. So can I just call him?
This is not a bridge to you meeting him.
I want to call him right now and say,
that's not how this podcast works at all. But he's still around. It sounds like he's still around.
He's still alive. He was, we have the same birthday. We're just 30 years apart. He's 90. I'm 60. When he was 60, I was 30 and just kind of starting my career and professionally doing wildlife art. And so he's the one guy. I think he's a really interesting guy. He's got his own foundation and has just been all over the world and record with paintings, recording the world of conservation and nature and all of these off species that you would never think kind of a mainstream artist would paint. But he's also so prolific. His paintings are sometimes 10 by 15 feet. And how he paints in a studio and does a 15 by 20 foot painting and backs up from it, and if you look at it closely, you just go, well, that's an abstract piece. You took and then you back up from it 25 feet and you go, oh my God, that's a buffalo in the dust, and you can barely see it. And how he does that is still amazing to a lot of us.
Sounds like pixels almost.
It's just a real talent, and it was before computers. So, he did a lot of his work before computer-aided photography helped him, create his work. But he's just one of the truly most talented artists that I know that is still alive.
We have a crack research staff on the podcast, and we'll get the crack research staff working on connecting you to him.
Yeah, I would love to visit with him, just even for an hour. But I don't know if that's going to happen. But he's my idol, one of my idols.
All right, so he's the first guy you come out from behind the curtains.
Yeah.
How about your female?
Yeah, that's interesting because you don't want to say something stupid.
It could be a family member. You can take the safe route if you want.
Yeah.
Or we can come back to it. We can talk about music, a musical act that you'd love to have on.
Yeah, musical act. Interesting question too. I've been to 1,000 concerts, and actually when I was in college, I worked the Rolling Stones concert in Hampton Roads 2 nights in a row, Christmas of 1981, and my fraternity, because we were all football players, got hired to do security at William Mary Hall and
it's a good place for a concert.
Oh yeah, we had great shows back then. doesn't happen anymore because they don't sell that venue like they used to. But
They should continue to do it to this day. It's a great venue.
It's a great venue for music. Very acoustically interesting place. And plus they can put that stage in the one end where they're music. But, you know, the one act that I never saw, and you're going to go, really? Because I tell people this, I never saw in live was, I've seen the Rolling Stones, the Police, the Marshall Tucker Band, you know, Allman Brothers, every band you can imagine, but I never saw Led Zeppelin in live in concert. And they had a show in London, like, you know, I guess it was about 10 years ago now, but they had been broken up for years, and they did one show in London as a what do they call it when you
reunion kind of
a
thing.
reunion show, and I was this close to getting a ticket to London to go to that show, and a couple of my buddies did, and I regret it.
I was going to say, if I had known about that, I don't think I knew about that opportunity, but Led Zeppelin hadn't played in a decade, and they're going to get together one time?
Yeah.
You talk about prolific.
Oh, my God.
Unbelievably prolific, and some would argue that their drummer was the best drummer of all time. Jimmy Page is in the conversation as a top 5 guitarist.
Yeah.
And then
and
Plant was unbelievable.
He was a legend. I mean, they were all legends. And just, I don't know, their music sort of transcended, like, somewhere between hard rock and roll, you know, mainstream rock and roll. And it walked that fine line back in the 70s and 80s where you just go, wow, I wish I'd gone to more of their shows.
It was unique, but it was also it had wonderful rhythm and beats, and they would flow in unbelievable ways throughout just one song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had and Robert Plant had such a, like, just the consummate rock and roll voice, you know.
And lifestyle.
Those guys were legends. And, you know, the Stones, the Who, I've been to all of them, but Zeppelin was one I never caught.
Yeah.
I wish I had. So that was my band. Robert Bateman was my guy. What's the other one?
Stand-up comic if you are into stand-up comedy. If you're not.
Yeah. No, I think one of my all-time favorites was George Carlin.
Oh my God, he got so surly as he got older.
Yeah, he did.
That's so surly.
He did, and he got a little more political and all that. But
yeah.
I think, you know, he just had a unique way of broaching a subject, you know, on stage, and and then his what was it, 30 words you can't say or
whatever the number was. Yeah,
those were hilarious. And his synonyms for parts of the body. And I don't know.
He would come at things from an angle that nobody had ever thought about. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my comedian.
You don't have to. You can give another male if you want to, but the standard structure includes female.
Yeah.
My son asked me this question. I said Susan B. Anthony. It was just kind of a cop-out answer.
Yeah.
Even though I would love to talk to her.
Yeah. And I admire a lot of women leaders and whatnot, but I think maybe it would be a celebrity woman, and I would have to, you know, I would have to say someone like from SNL from, you know, the 1970s or something.
You want me to give you one?
Yeah.
Gilda Radner.
Radner.
I think she was hilarious.
She was just unashamed to do anything.
Oh, she would do anything.
Any role, anything. Yeah.
She could hang with anybody.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to interview those people from back then. Not just Gilda, but the whole cast from SNL back then that was classic, you know, from Belushi to Chevy Chase to Dan Aykroyd and
Bill
the
Murray.
talent, the Bill Murray. I mean, oh my God, the talent that they composed has never been
No one's come close.
since then. No. So,
All right, tell me about your family.
So
Immediate family.
yeah. So I have 3 daughters. Melanie is my wife, and I have 3 daughters: Lindsay, Alexis, and little Melanie, which gets confusing sometimes because we have a big Melanie and a little Melanie. And Big Mel is only 5'3", 107 pounds, so it's ironic that she's called Big Mel. But that's her name. That's her nickname, Big Mel. And so our daughters they all grew up in Richmond, went to St. Catherine's School, they had 3 good colleges, UVA, W&L, and Swanee. And they all grew up being river rats, kind of like me. They grew up sailing and fishing with Dad and on hunting trips with me, and they all went to this North Carolina camp called Camp Marywood, where they learned how to be young women, and they were kayakers. They did whitewater kayaking, and they're sort of instilled their adventurous spirit. And I always say, we did all this and to instill a sense of adventure, and damn if they don't go off and move halfway around the world. And so they did. I mean, I've got one that lives in New York, and one in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and one in Sydney, Australia. So spread out all over the hemisphere.
They're trying to be worldly, it sounds like.
And they're all interestingly, they're all creative. They all have right brains, and I think they get that side from me, and they get their soft and caring and analytical and experiential side from their mother. They're an interesting combination. It's interesting how your children turn out to be combinations of the two of you.
But they're all different from each other.
But they're all different from each other still.
Yeah.
And they're wonderful. I've got one married and with a little boy so I have a grandson, my first grandchild.
Congrats.
Thanks. He's 16 months old now. And he's a hoot. You can already see the athleticism in him. We were just looking at some video of him shooting hoops at 1 year and 4 months, and he's got this little basket off, about 4 feet from him, and he just swish every time. It's like, okay, he's going to be that, and then he's a soccer player because he's kicking balls across the room, and so, I just said to all of my children, look, I raised 3 daughters. I have more testosterone than the average man, and I raised 3 daughters. So God owes it to me to have 5 or 6 grandsons.
Yeah, maybe 8.
Maybe 8.
Yeah.
So that's what I've ordered. I don't know if my order is going to come through.
Did you forget to place your order for a slot?
I've placed it over and over, and so I hope it comes through. But I like my little girls too, but I do need some boys around the house.
I totally understand. How'd you meet your wife?
We met through friends of friends, and I was in Atlanta, and she was in New York at the time. So we met in Atlanta. She came down to an event, and it was one of those things where we're all together all weekend, and I thought she was pretty cute, and one thing led to another, and we started dating from afar, which was hard.
Not
but
easy, yeah.
Wasn't easy at all. Plus, I was in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, which was full of beautiful Southern girls. But for some reason, my heart was stolen by this, this girl from Virginia. And there was a reason for it because, I eventually wanted to come back to Virginia. She was a Richmond girl and related to Rob. And so when we started dating, I was like, I'm kind of done with Atlanta after we started dating. And so we eventually decided to get engaged and then moved to Richmond soon thereafter.
So you guys got engaged when you were living in different places?
We did.
Wow.
We did. We dated the whole year and a half from afar. And how that worked out, I have no idea.
Good for you.
It did. It did. I think I was, as a young man, you're not sure you're committed to anything before you're 30 years old.
You're lucky to survive the day most days.
Right. So if I was that interested in her, there was a reason for it and there was a method to it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to, I think I'm going to marry this girl. And lo and behold, it took a lot of effort and a lot of travel, but it turned out to be a great thing.
All right, last thing from a posterity angle, anything you want to tell your future grandkids or your current 16-month-old grandson or future generations? Anything they should know from you?
Yeah. So my nickname for my grandfather nickname is Big Guy. So and my wife's name, Melanie's name, is Mimi because that was her grandmother's name. So Mimi and Big Guy. And, we always say, and this was true, Rob, when, we were talking about our family get-togethers. So, and it's true about almost every family. If you build it, they will come, right? So we're talking about not just building the family bonds and building the family traditions, building the family places that you go and the experiences that you share together. You build all those things and your family can stay together and will stay together. And even though they're halfway around the world, we just traveled to Australia for 2 weeks to all be together. And everybody had that commitment to, all right, we want to be together as a family. So they all arrived in Sydney, Australia for 2 weeks to spend a trip of a lifetime. And, we were the promoters of that. Like, okay, every year we're going to do a family adventure. Every year you're going to switch off with your families, your in-laws or whatever, and do Christmas and Thanksgiving and rotate and stuff. But building the family traditions are important, and that's what Melanie and I talk about all the time. Is if you do that, then your family that stays together will grow together, and their kids, their first cousins, will be close, and that's important. And it's important to a lot of people, not just to us, but all the families out there that want to keep their family together. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, it's a good tradition to have, and it's a good way of viewing the world, and yeah, more people should think that way. Yeah. Cool. Well, Guy, thank you so much for doing this. I learned a ton about you, and I enjoyed the conversation, man. You are a mini talented kind of cat, and I did not see that coming.
Well, thank you. I hope it makes it to the 90% of the more interesting ones.
It absolutely does.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.